Welcome to IVF This, episode 175, IVF and Sticky Note Thoughts. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. After 10 years of primary and secondary infertility due to both male and female factor infertility, I am now the mother to 3 beautiful miracles. I am married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you how to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you are all doing so well. Just announcing the episode number kind of blows my mind. 175 episodes, 175 pieces of unique content. I only have done like a handful of interviews. So let's say I've done 5 interviews. So 170 episodes of unique content dedicated to infertility, IVF, your thought work, all of the things. It's just such an immense privilege to get to show up in your podcast feed. I just can't thank you all enough for sticking with me, for listening to me, for trying some of the stuff that I suggest, all in the hopes and all of the effort of making this process just a little bit easier for you. So I'm doing fine, just trying to, keep all my thoughts from running around my head unsupervised. But that's actually a lot in line with what we're talking about today. So the topic for today, it might seem like a silly title, Sticky Note Thoughts, but I want you to hang with me because what we're talking about today is something insidious, something really sneaky, something really persistent, something that I bet is a universal experience for everyone who's listening to this podcast, and even a universal experience for people who are not listening to this podcast. But I don't really know that it's had a name for you, right? And that's what we're talking about. Those are sticky note thoughts, okay? So it's just like these, I want you to think of it as tiny Post-its just kind of all around your brain. And you swear there only used to be like 1 or 2 of them, and now they're everywhere. They're stuck to your computer, they're stuck to your fridge, the bottom of your sock, somehow in your car. This has deviated now into more of a biography of my life because I'm obsessed with actual sticky notes. But it reminded me of these thoughts that we have and why they are sticky, right? So that's the inspiration for the title, is the sticky note thoughts, these thoughts that we have that are sticky. We can't seem to get rid of. So what we're going to talk about is sticky note thoughts, what they are, why they feel so sticky, like why they show up, why they linger. And most importantly, we're going to start challenging if some of these sticky note thoughts are true, how they shape our emotions, our decisions, our actions, and then how we can start the work of letting go and stop letting them run the show, right? So let's get into it. So sticky note thoughts are, I want you to imagine your brain is a giant whiteboard, okay? There's a lot of space for different ideas, feelings, and thoughts to just kind of come and go, right? It's a big one, like in a proper classroom. And then you've got all this space, right? But then there are these little sticky notes, thoughts that just don't really float in and float out. They just hang around, they stick. And they're not exactly helpful in the like, hey, don't forget to get a jug of milk on your way home, right? It's not super helpful to remind me to do the tiny little tasks around the house, which is what I use actual sticky notes for. These are more like whispers. I'm not doing enough. I should have figured this out by now. Other people don't struggle like I do. This is a big one for IVF. What if this never happens for me? Right? And what's really wild about these sticky note thoughts is they're not super loud. They're not super obvious. Like some of them are, some of them can be, some of them can have this like shrill sound in your head, but they don't necessarily scream at you like the inner critic does, right? Instead, it's more like they hover in the background. They're just kind of quietly blending in. They're just kind of quietly blending into the noise in your brain already, but they're powerful enough to like shape how you feel about you and what you do, right? That's what makes it so insidious, because they're not super loud, they're not super obvious, but they're really, really powerful. And so it can just be that you're going about your day and suddenly your brain casually drops, you didn't do enough today, or you could have done more today, or man, you were really lazy today, into the mix. Like it just like a seasoning, right? And instead of questioning it, we just kind of accept it. Like, yeah, sure, I should have, I could have, I would have, right? All of the would-haves that we say to ourselves. And boom, it just sticks, right? And every time we engage in that, it gets more sticky and more sticky and more sticky. Okay? So why are they sticky? And this is really important to remember. These are not like new ideas. I have various podcast episodes tied directly to the rationale, but I think it's important to hear about it within the context of the sticky note thoughts, right? So why do these thoughts feel like you have Gorilla Glue on them, or like they've been spot welded to your brain? Number one, your brain loves efficiency. I have a podcast episode called The Motivational Triad. And so it's the three things that your brain focuses on. So one is seeking pleasure, two is avoiding pain, and three is you want your brain to be as efficient as possible. And that's one of the things that makes sticky thoughts so sticky. Your brain wants to take the path of least resistance, right? If you have a thought repeated enough, then kind of regardless of whether it's true or not, your brain is going to be like, oh, this must be important because I keep thinking it, right? Just the act of not challenging a thought or just accepting a thought at face value reinforces that the thought belongs there, because your brain's like, oh, well, I don't have to like sort through other thoughts to get new ones. This one is just like landed in my lap right here, and I don't have to do anything to get it. So that's perfect. That's a perfect thought for my little brain, right? And it's funny because your brain is actually like trying to be helpful. It thinks it's being helpful by making sure that these thoughts are easily accessible, except they're not really helpful, not super helpful at all. The second one, which I've also done a podcast episode on, called the negativity bias, right? Super fun tidbit. And by fun, I mean like completely unfair tidbit. Your brain pays more attention to negative thoughts than positive ones. Your brain pays more attention to negative experiences than positive experiences, right? It is just one of our brain's funny little dances that it does to make sure that we remember painful things so that we don't repeat it, right? It's called the negativity bias. It's an evolutionary thing. Back when we were dodging like saber-toothed tigers and whatnot, it was way more important for us to remember where danger was than to stop and admire a pretty sunset, right? We didn't have the luxury of just kind of looking around and going, oh, that's a beautiful sunset. No, we had to constantly be vigilant for our own physical safety, right? Now the world doesn't look like that. We're not actively being hunted, or hopefully not actively being hunted, but our brains are still scanning the environment constantly for potential threats, except those threats, quote unquote, are things now like failure, judgment, rejection, uncertainty, right? So if the thought pops up of like, I'm not good enough, your brain is going to flag that and keep it on repeat. Like it's going to flag it all the way up to the top, the highest priority, red flag attached to it. And we're just going to keep repeating it and repeating it, because your brain thinks it's important. When you don't challenge a thought or when you just blindly accept it, it thinks it's important enough to repeat it. Okay. Number 3, which plays into both of them, is they get reinforced all the time. I've spoken a little bit about this in the episode so far, but the more you think something, the more your brain builds neural pathways around it, to it, and in support of it. It's like walking a trail in the woods. The more times you walk the path, the clearer and easier the path becomes to see. Your sticky note thoughts have simply been walking around so many times that they have an innate feel for the landscape. It knows exactly where to swerve. It knows exactly where to pause. It has the whole layout for how it gets absorbed, reabsorbed, and reinforced into your brain. Okay? So now that we know why they're sticky, how do they affect us? So now you might be thinking, all right, I get that these sticky note thoughts are around, but how much harm do they actually do? Right? Spoiler alert, mostly it's a lot. It's a lot of damage that they do to us, right? So number one, they shape our emotions. Let's say a sticky note thought, which I've had on repeat most of my life, I'm behind, right? That thought creates pressure. The pressure creates stress. The stress makes it harder for you to focus, rest, or just feel at ease. Okay? That is one way that it can really affect us. It shapes our decision making, right? Maybe you want to take a break, but your sticky note says, we haven't done enough yet, right? Maybe your body and your mind and your heart are screaming to take a break from a cycle, right? But what if this was the cycle that worked? That's a very common thought progression, right? But instead of resting, you just keep pushing until you're completely exhausted, until you're completely burned out, until you've lost all hope, seemingly lost all hope, right? Maybe your sticky note thought says, what if this doesn't work, right? So you hesitate on something new or take a risk or trust yourself, right? The what if this doesn't work, very common thought with IVF, but it precludes the possibility that you wouldn't be able to handle something not working, right? So it's kind of taking your knees out from under you while you're trying to stand up and go through a really challenging time. They keep you stuck. Most of the sticky note thoughts feel like facts, like untampered with, not unquestioning facts. But really, they're just beliefs that we've practiced so much that they seem true. Okay? If you never challenge your thoughts, they become a reality, right? They eventually will come true, right? That self-fulfilling prophecy, if you believe them hard enough. And since it's easier to believe and remember and experience negative things, those tend to be where the sticky note thoughts come from. So we know what sticky note thoughts are. We know why they impact us so much. We know how they impact us so much. The question is, how do we work with them? Because you're not getting rid of them. Like, this is an evolutionary process. We can shift them. Everyone's going to have a few lingering sticky note thoughts. And if you've heard me talk about, like, that's your first thought, what is the second thought you're going to intentionally choose? A sticky note thought would be the first thought, the unconscious thought, the unconscious belief that just comes to you, sometimes apropos of nothing. Sometimes I'll just be walking around, taking a walk with like a friend or just by myself just to get out and get some fresh air. And my brain is going to offer me, well, you never wrote that novel that you said you were going to write by the time you were 40 and you're closing in on 41. Why, brain? Why? All of a sudden I was walking down the street and then I'm catching my own strays. Like, this is just how this works. We're going to have those sticky note thoughts come to us automatically, unfettered, and just lay it at our feet. It's our job to discern what we want to do with it, right? So this is kind of the process for understanding how to work with them. We don't need to get rid of them. We just need to be able to work with them, okay? So first step, you have to notice them. We can't fix what we don't see. The first step is always going to be awareness. And when I talk about awareness, there's no judgment, okay? You're literally holding space for the parts of your brain that you don't like, right? That you don't respond to, that you want to change. And that's okay. Like, if your brain offers you, like it offered me just the other day on my walk, you haven't written that book that you said you were going to write before you turn 40. Well, yeah, things change, right? I just need to notice it. There's no judgment. It's just an inherently neutral statement. I haven't written the novel I said I was going to write by the time I was 40. That is a true statement. But I'm the one that gets to decide if the statement was coming from a place of total assholery or if it was just lobbing something out to like, hey, chew on this for a little bit because we're kind of bored up here, right? But regardless of what the intention is, we just need to notice them. We don't have to do anything about them at first. Just acknowledge them like, oh, yeah, super helpful thought right there, brain. No thanks, right? When you start paying attention, you'll notice the ones that pop up over and over and over again. Maybe even keep like a running list. My sticky note thoughts are on like your phone or a hard copy list, just so you kind of have an idea of what you're working with. And I think sometimes to help kind of that along, if just trying to track them seems a little bit more challenging, you can do some journal prompts like, what are my most common sticky note thoughts, right? Just ask yourself that. Give yourself, set a 2-minute timer on your phone and ask that question at the top of the page and just see what comes up, right? There's no right or wrong answers. We're just trying to find more information. Another journal prompt you could do after you've identified some of them is, when do they come up, right? Is it stress? Is it comparison? Is it fatigue? Is it heartache, right? When do these commonly come up, right? And then another question, kind of just a third question on top of those other two is, do I believe them or have I just gotten used to them? There's a difference. Like if you believe them, that's one thing. If you've just gotten used to them, that's another thing. That's a different approach, right? If you've just gotten used to them, then challenging them would be the only thing that we need. If you believe them, we have to challenge that thought too, but we also have to repair the relationship you have with yourself, right? So they are different. So it's important to recognize what they are, when and how they show up, and do you believe them, or is it just habit? The second step is to question them. I know I talked about that in the first one, and here we are. Just because a thought has been hanging around your brain for years and years and years does not make it inherently true, okay? Maybe ask yourself, would I say this to a friend? I probably would not say to a friend, I can't believe you haven't written that book that you said you were going to write before you turned 40 and you're almost 41. Like, that's a pretty dickish thing to say. I wouldn't say that to my friend, so why am I saying that to myself, right? Another question that you could ask is there actual evidence to support this, or is it just a feeling, right? Nobody likes me. Well, do you have evidence from everybody that you've ever met that they don't like you, or do you just feel like no one likes you? Two different things. One of my favorite questions to ask my clients when we're talking about something really specific is, what's another way to look at this? Right? If there's another way to look at nobody likes me, what would be another way to look at that? Right? Maybe it's you feel insecure with a large group of people, and so it makes it more difficult for you to connect. When you don't feel connected, you feel rejected, right? There's a lot of different angles and ways that we can take it that don't inherently reinforce the belief or don't prove it to be right. Another example could be a sticky note thought of I'm failing, which again is a common one for me. Something that you might ask that I was just doing this exercise, that's why it's fresh on my mind, would be like, failing compared to what? To who or whom? What, like, who gets to decide what success should look like? And why am I deciding that my success, my current success, is not good enough to meet my own expectations? Otherwise, I wouldn't be failing, right? So again, you're wanting to take a wide angle lens to something that's you've probably been holding on for a very long time. Step 3 is replace or reframe, right? You don't have to force yourself to go from I'm failing to I'm amazing overnight. It's not realistic. That is far too big of a gap to kind of cover. And that's fine. But you may look for something a little bit more neutral or believable, like I'm figuring this out. I'm doing what I can with what I have. My timeline is my own. When I was working with my therapist last week, one of the things that we were talking about was my reactivity. I can get very defensive very quickly, particularly with my husband, and I've been working on that. And one of the things that we were talking about was, kind of practicing a pause. And I said to her, I said, I'm not good at pausing, right? I have this whole story about how I can't slow down, my ADHD, all of these things, right? And I paused. I actually did it in real time. And I said, you know what? It's not that I can't do it. It's not that I'm bad at doing it. And I just am not practiced at doing it, right? That's just a reframe. We're just reframing it. I'm not saying that I'm like the most patient person that's ever walked to the earth, right? That's not realistic. I'm not saying that I will never get defensive again. I absolutely will get defensive. It's one of my go-to coping mechanisms. So that's not going anywhere anytime soon. But I can practice pausing, so hopefully I can reduce some of my reactivity. That's the reframe I want you guys to think about. Because if we're trying to go from one end of the cavern to the other end of the cavern, from a wholly negative to a wholly positive, it's not realistic, and you're actually going to end up feeling worse, because then the narrative then becomes like, oh great, I can't even do this right? No, we want to take the pressure off of you, and we do that by just shifting some words, just by making it a little bit more neutral or believable, right? And then ultimately, on the fourth step is you get to decide. You get to decide what to keep. Not all thoughts are bad. Not all thoughts feel the same in the same circumstance, right? So if a thought of like, I'm behind, that might suit me. Like if I need a bunch of adrenaline and I'm getting really competitive, a thought like I'm behind might actually spur me into action, might actually help me. If it's apropos to nothing and I'm starting to wallow in, my great defeats in my life, then I'm behind is not going to be a super helpful one, right? So you get discernment, like, at this moment in time, that thought's not helpful, right? There's not a black and white to this. There are not thoughts that are always unhelpful, and there are thoughts that are not always helpful, right? Most thoughts are a mix of all of them. So ultimately, you get to decide what stays and what goes. Like, you are in charge. I know it doesn't feel like that sometimes. It feels like there are tiny little terrorists in our brain that don't want us and will do everything they can to fight against us. But ultimately, you are in charge. You get to decide. If the thought, I may never have this in terms of your family, if that provides you some sort of peace or comfort or acceptance, fabulous. If that causes a great deal of heartache, well, then it's not going to be super helpful. Those are the ones that we don't want to hang on to. Those are the ones that we want to try to reframe or to shift a little bit, right? But I think that that's the